Welcome to my channel, Delightful Stories. I'll be happy if you subscribe to my channel and like it. Enjoy watching and don't forget to leave your opinion in the comments about the story. The hand on the circular dial was slowly approaching noon. There was still a long 6 hours to go before the end of the day. Both Carl and Carl had to get through them somehow. On the table in front of the young man, there were several financial statements spread out at once, each one neatly pinned down. Carl worked as a senior fabric purchasing manager for a private textile company. Now he sat in his chair and honestly tried to concentrate on his work. But every now and then he involuntarily glanced at the hands of the office clock. It is difficult to focus on the dry numbers of the report. When your most cherished dream is about to come true, Carl thought, and he had a smile on his face at the same time. In his soul, Carl, 28, felt an unprecedented lift and lightness. He had not felt such good feelings for a long time. It seemed like something incredibly good was waiting for him, and he only had 6 hours left until that moment. In the end, the manager had to do a few cycles, soothing his breathing, which he had recently learned from video clips on the internet. Heart and mind were in no way willing to submit to the rigors of the routine, so Carl had to spend nearly half an hour on forced sedation. Thank goodness no one came into his office during that time and saw how he diligently holds air to the limit, absorbs it in his lungs, and then with a noisy exhalation gives it back to them. Having thus coped with the emotions that gripped him, Carl was able to somehow get through the rest of the day once he was done with all his business. The guy immediately rushed off at full speed to the much-anticipated meeting. The other employees of the firm, noticing the unusually excited manager, laughed softly, saying that Carl had a propeller in one place. On a date with his beloved girlfriend in a hurry. He was in such a hurry that he would be carried along by his own feet in the air. The co-workers joked with no malice whatsoever. After all, they knew Carl, above all, as an extremely stable and manager who studied every number and every detail in the documents he received. Calmness and efficiency, and unwavering in the decisions made, were the traits in Carl's character that enabled him to achieve such a responsible position. Now Carl had a different goal. Not to be late for a meeting with his old acquaintance Bernard, on whom the fulfillment of the young manager's lifelong dream depended. The fact was that Bernard had borrowed a rather large sum of about $1 million from Carl. 3 months had passed since then, and Carl took the liberty of reminding his friend of the debt he owed. Such a considerable sum was needed by the manager for a reason. The young man had been saving for a long time to buy his own house, where he planned to soon move with his bride. Bernard was an unquestionable gambler. Gambling had at one time completely consumed his life. Carl feared that he would never pay back the money he had borrowed from him, so he decided to remind him that the term for which the men had agreed was almost at an end. Naturally, when Bernard heard that, he was worried. Not a day went by that he did not sit down with his cronies, as he called them, for a game of cards, or disappear to the underground clubs, hanging out at the roulette table and slot machines for hours. Of course, the addiction has led to the same thing, which sooner or later leads everyone. The man formed a sizable debt, and the money was taken from the most. Neither is the real representatives of crime, and who owned all these secrets of entertainment establishment. Realizing that it was worth his life, Bernard risked turning to Carl for help. He met him occasionally for his day job. Carl was in charge of a large warehouse at one of the firms that Carl's company worked with. One day during a conversation, the manager let slip to his friend that he wanted to buy a house, and he even had the necessary amount of money for it. He said that all that was left was a little bit of packing. And next year, he and his girlfriend will finally be able to move out of his parents' cramped 2-bedroom apartment and into their own family nest. "Well done, Carl," with feigned enthusiasm said Bernard. "It's so nice to see when others are able to do such a large scale. I'm kind of unlucky in life." He lowered his eyes thoughtfully, pretending to study the asphalt. I wanted to start my own startup back then. Didn't work out. They didn't give me the funding. Then you suddenly, and now I do not know, to be honest. Maybe this is the last time I'll see you. Are you worried about something? Carl asked. What happened? What do you have? Yes. Bernard waved his hand. It's not really a big deal. Now Carl was getting worried. Something Bernard clearly did not say, being by nature a kind, sympathetic man. The young manager didn't dare offer his old acquaintance any help. No, well, if you need any specific amount, tell me. Oh, how do you need it? Exclaimed in response, Bernard immediately reached for a lifeline for him. Can't you imagine? I tell them to pay me back in 6 months, and they don't. Like, give me the money in a week. Otherwise, you know what will be different. They'll roll me in concrete and we'll never see each other again. Just like that on the bench. Carl only sighed in response. He already regretted telling Bernard about his future purchase. On the other hand, it would not be humane to leave a comrade in trouble like that, especially if there really was a criminal involved, which Carl did not doubt in the slightest. How much do you need? He asked eventually. Bernard immediately perked up, and in his eyes gleamed relief mixed with excitement. Yes, there really isn't much there. It's only $800,000. That's a hell of a gamble. How'd you get that kind of money? Of course, Carl didn't expect it to be that much. But it was too late to back out. Carl, man, I'll pay you back soon, I promise. Don't think about it. We'll do it right. I'll notarize the receipt. Official documents, copy of passport. We'll do whatever you want. Just help me out, brother. Do you want me to get down on my knees right now? Bernard knew how to masterfully change his face mask when he really needed money. Carl was aware of this peculiarity of his. But it was one thing to lend him a couple of thousand before his paycheck, and quite another to give him practically all the money he had worked so hard to earn and wanted to spend on a new house. Looking into Bernard's tear-red eyes, Carl thought that this time he really seemed to be in dire need. What was he going to do? He would have to bail out his old friend. All right, I'll help you in principle to lend such a sum, but only on one condition, anything. Anything, Bernard assured him hotly, and for reassurance put his right hand to his heart. Anything you want. I swear I'll give you the money. I'll pay you back every penny of it. You'll give that money solely on account of what you owe. No gambling with it, understand? Yes, 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 Bernard nodded like a parrot. He was ready to say anything to get Carl to help him. And he didn't back down from his plan. Carl held up his index finger. That's the first thing. The second is that you pay me back the whole sum in exactly 3 months and not a day later. Is that a deal? You're insulting? Of course I got it. 1 million, 3 months. Buddy, you're a big man. You just saved my life, you know. Carl smiled sadly. He was glad to help Bernard, but at the same time he was well aware that he would never see the money he had invested in his friend again. And so, after the appointed time, the men were to meet for the final payment. When a week ago, Carl called Bernard. The latter, at first, did not pick up the phone for a very long time, and then several times dropped the incoming call altogether. Then Carl sent 4 text messages to his acquaintance and did not hesitate to remind him of the approaching loan repayment deadline. Apparently, Bernard was affected by the official tone of the messages, since the senior manager finally waited for a call back. That's when it became clear what Carl himself feared the most. Bernard still had no money, much less to repay the debt he had incurred. Bernard, how could it be? We had agreed on everything beforehand. The manager was angry. You promised that you could give the money almost to the day. And now what? What am I supposed to do now? There was an awkward pause on the other end of the line. Then the friend deigned to answer, though his voice was not audible in his former enthusiasm. Friend, you wait. The circumstances I have discovered are not the most pleasant, in general. Bernard started from afar. I can explain everything to you. I wish you'd give me at least 2 more months. No, Bernard, you heard me, and that's out of the question. What am I going to tell my fiancé, my parents? They're hoping we'll go home and look at houses in the area. And you're telling me to tell them that we waited 2 more months, and then another 2 more months. Carl realized that he had lost his temper, and perhaps he was speaking too rudely to his old acquaintance. But there was nothing he could do about it. He felt too sorry for the money that had gone to nothing. And knowing Bernard's character, one could expect that that 1 million would probably not appear in his account during the spring. Oh, Carl. All right. You're so petty, it turns out, by golly. And on the other end, Bernard grimaced. I'll tell you what. You give me a week. I'll give you my country house instead of the money. All right. It's a nice house in good condition. It's all inside. I thought I'd be in it to nurse my grandchildren in my old age. But I guess it's not my destiny now. What can I do? Carl felt a faint prick of conscience. But it lasted only a moment between the fact that he was taking away his friend's dacha and the fact that he had taken away his lifelong dream. Carl chose the latter, especially if the house really was half as good as he had painted it. Then you could say that Carl had practically killed 2 birds with 1 stone. He had saved the money, and he had a nice place to live. The money left over from the deal should have been enough for minor repairs and remodeling parts of the house to Carl's and his beloved bride's liking. Eventually, the men arranged to meet out of town. It was there that he was to hand Carl all the documents for the house, anticipating the long-awaited repayment of his debt, albeit in this form. Carl drove in a cab while smiling at the silent driver. When the car pulled up to the high gate of the property behind which was old Bernard's farm, Carl was at first even a little confused. The cottage in question was in fact a huge 2-story mansion. The manager had seen houses of this level only in foreign television series before. A huge building with a poster and the roof and its own outhouses may well have belonged to some successful businessman or a television star. But what would such an avid Bernard? Jesus, Bernard, is this really your house? Carl was astonished. Trying to get out of the cab, I should have warned him that your cottage will turn out to be a real estate. Bernard just smirked grudgingly. What was the point of your warning? You couldn't wait. You want everything here and now. That's all right. And the house is yours now. And the house is yours now. And the land is yours. In fact, I've been waiting here for half an hour with the papers. Let's get this over with. The man opened a leather folder and slipped 2 sets of keys into Carl's hands, along with a file containing the necessary papers to complete the transaction. Here are the keys to the house and all the documents. Bernard glanced busily at his own wristwatch as if he were in a terrible hurry. The watch was, oddly enough, the cheapest Chinese brand. Of course, I didn't expect you to be so patient. I signed my name all over it. All you have to do is notarize the papers, but that's at your own expense. So you have to give this beauty for nothing. Bernard looked at the mansion with a look of regret. Carl continued to stare at the house in disbelief. The young man could not yet fully believe his good fortune. Such a fortunate turn he could not even imagine. Bernard, you understand, I'm not taking your house out of spite, but because you can't pay me back in money. And thank you very much, of course. To be honest, I could never have earned a house like that myself. God, my wife will be so happy. Bernard grinned and looked at the time again. Consider yourself heard by the universe. All right, old man, I really must be going. So you're sure you're taking the object, so you don't have to give me the wrong thing. Carl sighed enthusiastically, turning to Bernard. Really? I accept everything, of course. Even if it has to be repaired, that's not your problem. I'll take care of it. Right, I'm sorry about that. But in all fairness, it was the right thing to do. Meanwhile, another cab pulled up to the gate. This time, it was for Bernard. He hurriedly opened the door and sat down in the front seat before he answered. In all fairness, Carl is a fighting friend. Now, we won't be seeing each other anytime soon. Carl scrambled. forgetting to ask where will his acquaintance go now. Wait, Bernard, what do you plan to do next? Am I right in assuming that you're no longer working in the warehouse? Bernard slammed the car door in front of Carlo. He wanted to get out of the place as soon as possible. Carl, with his childish enthusiasm and irrelevant questions, was not at all appropriate. But Bernard tried one last time to put on a placid smile. Hey, Carl. I can't tell you yet where I'll be tomorrow. The main thing is that I'm leaving town. I'm starting a new life. With those words, Carl's acquaintance ordered the driver to drive off, smirking contentedly. He wore large sunglasses over his eyes. Aviators. No one else would see him here. After which he looked at the car with some bewilderment. And why is he doing this to me? The manager thought. But aloud he just said, well, good luck in your new place. Bernard. The young man did not dare to go inside the house. He wanted to do it later when he could completely calm his feelings. Instead, he walked around the perimeter of the huge mansion. At the same time, he took pictures on his smartphone. Now there would be something to show his parents and Alice, who would surely be awfully happy about such an important acquisition. I'll surprise her. Tonight, I thought, Carl, she's been wanting her own house for so long. And here it is. The manager continued to take enthusiastic pictures of the views on his phone. Around his mansion now. As it turned out, there was even a small park with a fountain and an alpine hill behind the house, though the yard looked somewhat neglected, as if no one had cleaned it for a long time. What he saw did not embarrass Carl. He was sure he could arrange everything in the best possible way, to the envy of all his colleagues, and to the delight of his elderly parents, whose living space he could finally vacate with a light heart. After the deal was done, and Carl had finished his rounds of the lot, he went straight to his fiancée, Alice, who was just home alone that evening. Her parents had gone to visit relatives in a neighboring town. Before coming to the girl with the good news, the manager decided to go to the supermarket, where he bought a bottle of expensive champagne, a box of good chocolates, and some of the delicacies that Alice adored so much. In particular, although Carl still had a few weeks before his paycheck, he still bought a few delicacies of premium seafood as an appetizer to the liquor. It was still possible to celebrate such an event, Carl thought to himself. It's not every day you get luxury real estate for next to nothing. Alice was happy to see her fiancé, though she was a little surprised to see a bottle of champagne in his hands. Surprise! Carl exclaimed, immediately as the girl opened the door. Wow, this champagne isn't cheap. What's the occasion? Satisfied Carl winked at her, smiling at her. And when you let me in, beautiful, then I'll tell you. A little later, when the cheerful drink was already poured into crystal glasses, and the appetizers were beautifully arranged on plate, Carl lit a couple of candles and made a solemn speech. We have waited so long for the moment when we will finally have our own place, when we won't have to meet sneaking around at your place anymore, and when we will finally be able to live in our own family nest, where it will just be you and me and then our children. And that day has come. And that day has come. It's done. Now you and I have such a magical place. Now we have a nest. Alice at that moment took a neat bite out of a slice of cheese, almost choking over a cough. The girl slowly asked, looking her chosen one in the eye, Carl, the sweetheart? My sweetheart, my sweetheart. What are you talking about now? Is it what I think it is? Carl nodded happily in response and took his phone out of his pocket, intending to show his bride the latest pictures of their new home. What's your house going to be like? Just in case, once again clarified the girl. Yes, Alice. Just look at what a beauty we got. Instead of answering, Alice laughed loudly with happiness and threw herself around her lover's neck. She covered his face with kisses, while Carl tried to show her the pictures of the huge house. But wait, he reassured her impatiently. Just look at the columns. And what an outbuilding. We'll even have our own park there. Can you imagine with the fountain? Of course, some things require some more investment, but nevertheless, Sveta's eyes burned with passion, which only increased as her fiancé showed her color pictures on the screen of his smartphone. "Carl, you're doing just fine. Tiger." The girl shouted playfully, then playfully scratched at the young man's chest, forcing him to undo a couple of top buttons on his shirt. "Just tell me one thing. How on earth did you manage to buy such a beauty? And don't tell me anything about it. You've been saving up for the house for a long time, I remember. And you still complain that you didn't have enough money." Carl told his sweetheart the circumstances under which he got the mansion. Alice thought for a moment and then said, with the look of someone who is not the first day in the construction business, "The girl was just working in one of those companies. Only as a secretary, though. You know, Carl, people like that Bernard of yours can't just give us a house that's all packed up. You'll have to go down there tomorrow morning and take a good look at it from the inside. I'm sure he left you some kind of trick." "What kind of catch could there be?" the man asked in amazement. "We made an honest deal with him. All I have to do is to notarize it. It only takes a couple of weeks. And that's all. The house is all ours." "The house is all ours." Alice raised his eyebrows skeptically. "You wait, rejoice, honey. I still need to see what he gave you in exchange for the debt. And what if it all rotted inside, or even worse? We chewed up all the furniture. You can expect anything in here. Oh, I wish we could go tomorrow. I could have gone with you. We could have seen everything together." Carl involuntarily thought about the words. Somehow the girl really was right. And then there was the behavior. Berners was so strange that day. Eventually the young men switched to other, more interesting topics of conversation and had a wonderful evening. Anyway, now they had a home of their own. The next morning, as soon as the sun rose, the young man began to pack for the road. The manager realized that his fiancée might be right about the interior condition of the mansion. Carl himself planned to inspect the house as soon as he got the chance. Today was the man's unscheduled day off. Well, there was no time to waste. When he arrived at the place, just as he had done the last time in a cab, Carl hurriedly took out the keys to the gate and slowly turned them in the lock. To his surprise, the gate opened almost silently, nor was there any sign of rust on it. As he approached the door of the house, he felt a pleasant shiver. After all, it was now his private property. Not bad for 30 years, right? The front door also opened without the slightest problem. Carl found himself in the spacious lobby, which seemed to be completely filled with the clearest morning light. This effect was achieved by the wraparound glazing of the veranda, which looked out over the garden. "Wow," Carl whispered, struck by the beauty of the interior of the house. The young man entered a neat living room, paneled in dark oak and covered with wide silver-gray wallpaper, depicting the flight of wild cranes on its silk surface. Fine wooden furniture and expensive appliances were everywhere. A separate, rather large room was set aside for the kitchen, where all the kitchen utensils were harmoniously built in. In addition, Carl counted 4 more vacant rooms on the first floor, one of which was a workroom, and another more reminiscent of a small women's boudoir. That was something Alice would definitely like. Then he continued to look around the house on the basement. He found a real swimming pool and a compact home theater for 15 people. This, for a young manager, was truly chic. And nowhere was there even a hint of decrepit old age or the same mice his young bride feared so much. And look at the billiard room and the room that housed the laundry rooms at the same time. Carl concluded that in this house he would not just be fine, but very fine. The longer Carl stayed in the mansion and examined every part of it, the more he liked the 2-story hulk. It was full of pleasant surprises at every turn. Finally, Carl climbed the broad staircase that led directly to the second floor. Here, it was a little more modest than downstairs. Apparently, the previous owners had not had time to finish the test work, so the repairs, which had been done to a very good standard, had only a few cosmetic procedures to complete them. Exploring the rooms one by one, Carl suddenly stumbled upon a door that was noticeably tighter closed than the others, and the man pressed harder on the doorknob, and it yielded. The manager saw a small, very bright room. The wallpaper was in blue flowers. It made it clear that only a woman could be the mistress here. Suddenly Carl saw her. At first, Carl did not even realize what exactly was in front of him. A wide, low bed fully occupied one of the walls of the room, blocking out half of its space. Next to the bed was a wheelchair which looked quite modern. There was also a glass coffee table on which stood a few bottles, obviously of medicine, a half-empty glass of water, and a book open in the middle. It was only then that Carl's gaze moved back to the bed. And no, he really hadn't imagined it. There was a young, pretty woman lying there. She looked a little younger than himself, judging by the fact that she was sitting on the bed in warm pajamas and was in no hurry to get up, although it had long past 12:00 outside the window. She could not walk at all, probably paralyzed. The manager thought to himself. The stranger's pale skin seemed almost translucent under her huge, pale green eyes. Painful black shadows lingered. The woman stared at Carl in silent horror. "Who are you?" In a weak voice, she whispered, "Why are you in my house?" Where is Bernard?" Carl realized that it was very difficult for the girl to speak. Apparently, her physical emotional strength was almost completely drained. "Who knows how long she has been like this without food or water?" Carl hesitated. He himself was as surprised as the sickly stranger. "I am the new owner of this house, Carl. Yesterday, I bought this mansion from Bernard as payment for the debt." "Hold on. Let me show you all the paperwork. We were all clear on that." The young man wanted to go downstairs quickly. The papers were in the office on the first floor when he suddenly realized, wait a minute. "How do you know Bernard?" "I should be the one to ask you how you ended up here, and in this predicament." A narrow line of pale lips contorted, and a sad expression appeared on the woman's face. She was about to cry. No, I don't believe it. How could he go so low? Did he really not care that much about me and my feelings?" Carl just waved his hand at the woman. "Stay here." But then he realized his mistake. "Why, look, forgive my ignorance. You can't walk, can you?" The woman began to howl, pressing her hand to her mouth. "Wait, don't cry, please. Have you eaten or drunk anything today? Can I get you some water as well?" She just nodded. "Yes, if that's all right," she asked in the same whisper, interrupted every second by the sobs coming to her throat. Carl had no clear recollection of rolling down the stairs, rushing first to the study for the documents, and then to the kitchen. There were several bottles of clean water in the refrigerator, but that was the end of its contents. Continuing to be amazed at what he saw and perplexed by how a stranger and even a paralyzed woman was in his house, Carl just as swiftly flew back up the stairs. "Here you go," he pronounced. Placed on the lap of a stranger, a folder of documents, and with the other hand poured fresh water in a glass. The remnants of the old one Carl prudently poured into a window-mounted indoor flower. The girl gratefully accepted the glass and took several large sips, and in her eyes lurked the energy of life. After looking through the documents and making sure that the man standing in front of her was indeed the owner of this house, the stranger slowly handed them back to Carl, then pressed her palms to her face again and wept softly. "God, I never thought I would live to see this. My husband was a scoundrel, already gave our house for debts, and he gave it to me as well. Apparently he thought that I would bring the new owners more happiness than him." Carl frowned. "What are you talking about? So Bernard, your husband's ex?" The woman nodded. "We have been divorced for a year now. He was the one who insisted that we be divorced right after the accident, when... Anyway, when the doctor said that I could no longer walk. He hadn't cared about me before, but now he threw me away like I was nothing. God, you'd think I was some kind of cat that could be passed along with the house to other owners. Tell me, do I deserve all this? There were tears in the woman's eyes. She was no longer hiding her feelings. It seemed that the water she drank only prompted her to speak out. The pain, longing poured into her heart. The girl a powerful stream. Excuse me, what's your name? Carl asked. Nika. You see, my husband, he was always gambling. He liked to gamble a lot, and necessarily for a lot of money. It seemed to me at the time that he was in control. He knew the measure and could always stop at any time. He was always so confident about it. And then it turned out that it was all a lie. Yes, at first he was winning something, but it was only until he sat down at the table again. I tried to stop him. I tried to eliminate this monstrous stress in him, but he called me his mascot, said that I always brought him luck in the hall. What I see now is that our marriage didn't bring luck to me or to him. Carl felt his own heart squeeze painfully at the sight of this unhappy young woman. He could certainly have expected all sorts of things, but for him to turn out such a scoundrel. Carl was only now comparing all the facts and those suspicious details in his behavior that he had not noticed before. The manager realized that the friend was only taking advantage of his kindness and money. He had never been a real friend. Despite his fervent assurances to the contrary, Carl was completely discouraged. After all, it turns out that Alice was right. The house really was a trick. And you know what all of a sudden? He asked the woman. Let me feed you. You must be very hungry. How long has that bastard kept you on a dry ration? She was embarrassed by this unexpected suggestion, but she answered honestly. You know, Bernard's been gone for days, leaving me water and medicine, and now he's gone. I can't even get him on the phone. He must have left town by now. The young man nodded in response. With all his might, he clenched his fists. Yes, he has. You haven't eaten anything for almost 4 days. He's a creep after all. Carl gathered what strength he had not to swear in front of the lady and hurried away to the kitchen. There he ordered groceries, and an hour later, he was at the stove, working on chicken broth and vegetable stew. Carl had always enjoyed cooking. That's why he didn't really like going out to restaurants with his fiancée. The man believed that he could do the same thing at home in a restaurant. They only overpay for the products, the loud name, the establishments, and the ghostly atmosphere of culinary elegance. When the young man brought the former mistress of the house to eat, she only looked at the soup with surprise. Did you cook it yourself? Of course, he answered her easily. Why are you surprised? Everyone knows that the best cooks in the world are men. Try the broth. It's all natural and no chemicals, I assure you. That's what I always feed my mother when she's not helping. I could feel the blood rushing to her pale cheeks. Carl noticed it too, so he tried to soften his brave pressure. Don't worry, I won't hurt you, and I certainly do not want to poison you. No, that's not what I had in mind. The woman was trying to collect her thoughts. You know, you're the first person, and at the same time a complete stranger to me, who so sincerely wants to help. For the first time in a long time. Thank you. Nika accepted the plate from Carl's hands gratefully, and then realized that she had never asked the name of her unexpected savior. When he introduced himself and asked not to thank him again, like that's what any normal person would have done in his place, Nika relaxed a little and told her new landlord her sad story. Nika told Carl that she and Bernard had only been married for 5 years. They met by chance in a cafe. Nika was ordering coffee and cakes, and Bernard was standing right behind her. An informal conversation ensued between the two young people. And somehow it happened that the future husband was able to charm the girl with his lightness of character and a surprisingly unshakable faith in himself. Their relationship began quickly enough, and as Nika now realized, It was not long before we were married. Very quickly, the girl realized that Bernard had married not so much for her as for her money. Nika had been a successful businesswoman, a real businesswoman before the whole accident. She was engaged in the sale of prefabricated houses in the construction company, which she inherited from her father. Apparently, Bernard didn't just meet Nika and Terry for a reason. He had probably spied a rich bride for himself beforehand. But that wasn't all, I realized much later. At the time, out of inexperience and stupidity, I thought my husband was just eccentric in his own right. And that risk was a hobby of sorts. You have no idea how stupid I was at the time. He used me as a money bag for his own enrichment, and I was a naive girl, believing everything he told me. Don't blame yourself. The manager tried to calm her down. You didn't know about his rotten nature. To be honest, I almost considered him a friend myself, and he turned out to be a scoundrel. Nika only shook her head in the negative and continued the story. All the same, I should have felt something. At least a prick. Seen at least one inconsistency in his word. It was like I was blind. I did not want to see anything from this love. But the crush quickly faded when I began to notice the way he looked at my money and the money of our mutual partners. It was a bad idea. Bringing him into my deal then. Bernard was already seriously into gambling at the time, and I hoped that this interaction with real money would help me win him back, to talk some sense into him. Well, he set everyone up, me and my partners. It was after that I openly told him that I didn't love him anymore. I remember how calm he was at that moment, and he wasn't surprised. All he said was that I was going to regret it. Then the accident happened, Carl guessed. Well, yes, but no one could prove Bernard's involvement. The investigators concluded it was a classic accident. Wet road, slightly over the speed limit. And here I am in my wheelchair, and my beloved husband is filing for divorce. And I couldn't even get out of bed yet. My spine was severely damaged. There's no way to fix it, is there? Carl asked cautiously. Nika sighed heavily. There is. We need to do surgery, but there are no surgeons of this level in our country. The attending physician recommended me one clinic in Boston. So what is it? The man was surprised. You have no idea. Sadly, Nika smiled. About money, of course. My husband deliberately delayed the process of divorce for a year. Allegedly on purpose, to be able to take care of me. He knew that surgery abroad could help me, but the amount it would cost. Bernard was much more interested in it than the health of a paralyzed spouse. So he was deliberately disappointed in my physical condition. Told all our friends and family that there was no hope. And then he just locked me in this room all alone. No. At first I was taken care of by a nurse, a very nice woman. And at first it wasn't so bad, but money tends to run out sooner or later. Especially in the hands of a man like Bernard. He managed to squander my entire fortune in just 6 months, even though he pretended to go to his regular job every day as a warehouse manager. I probably wouldn't have known about it if it hadn't been for the nurse, who brought me some documents about my company. Secretly from my husband, of course. That's when it all came out. When Bernard found out, he was very angry. He just stopped paying attention to me. He's got a wife, that's fine. She'll die and be fine. That's what they seem to say. Carl did not know what to say to such a frank confession of this amazing woman. He could easily imagine how Nika sobbed at night, tormented by the pain and heartbreak inflicted by her husband. Her heart wounds were deep, and they definitely would not soon heal. Bernard, meanwhile, was doing better. He had purged his own wife, and then virtually left her to die alone in that enormous mansion. The wickedness of his soul truly knew no bounds. And if Carl could have changed anything, he would never have taken the damned house from Bernard. And the day they met, he would certainly have asked to look around inside to see Nika and try to help her. So why didn't you ever go to the police? Didn't you even try? Carl asked at the end of her story. Nika clasped her hands tightly together. She wasn't immediately able to answer that question. I've been thinking about it for a long time. The reason might seem more trivial to you, but I just cared about my life, no matter how ruined it may seem to me now. You see, if Bernard had suddenly been involved in that accident, no one would have given me a guarantee of my own safety, that if he wanted to finish what he started. Carl nodded silently. For a moment, the young man thought that everything that was happening here to him was one big, bad dream. As soon as he opened his eyes, the nightmare would dissipate, and he would find himself at home in the cozy little twin room of his parents, or in the cool bedroom of his fiancée. Carl decided to squeeze his eyes shut a couple of times just in case. But even when he blinked properly, the paralyzed girl was still lying on the bed in front of him, resolutely refusing to disappear anywhere. In the end, Carl decided that he was responsible for the former mistress of the mansion, and therefore under no circumstances would he do to her as her ex-husband did. Nika, I promise you that you will never stay in this house again. The manager told her in a firm voice, I will come to you every day, and you will get all the help and medicine you need. Really, Carl, my presence in the house does not commit me to anything. After all, you could just give me up to some private hospice and forget about it forever. Started waving off the guy's help. Carl took the plate from the girl and just smiled good-naturedly. You're burying yourself too soon. You should not even think about it. You are still a young, beautiful woman. I'm sure you will get better in time. Carl felt that he could not leave this beautiful girl to her fate, or put her in some almshouse to live out her life, even if it were better living conditions. The young man was afraid to admit to himself that he liked it very much. Purely humanly, of course. The boy involuntarily felt a sense of respect for her. Not everyone, having endured such an ordeal, would be able to remain with such fortitude as was present in Bernard's ex-wife. From that day on, Carl began to come to us almost every day. He did this as a rule, either before or after work, since he decided not to tell his parents, much less Alice. Alice was jealous by nature, as it were. And if she found out that Carl was helping a complete stranger, there would be a lot of noise. Carl even had to roll his old car out of the garage. He was an environmentally minded man, and so he made every effort to minimize pollution in his household. It was for this reason that Carl had decided a couple of years earlier to give up automobiles for a while. But now, it was a completely different situation, and the daily cab rides out of town could also cause colleagues and acquaintances. Not the young man needed suspicion. Carl turned into a real guardian angel for Nikki, as he helped her literally with everything. He cooked lunches and dinners, bought the necessary drugs and painkillers for the young woman. Nika was constantly suffering from severe pain in her back from a damaged spine. He even called a private practice doctor for her, so that he could once again examine the girl and give his own verdict. Unfortunately, the honest doctor's diagnosis was exactly the same as Nike's at the public hospital. She needed expensive surgery in Boston to make a full recovery. At first, the former mistress of the mansion was wary of accepting help from Carl. She did not want to be indebted to him and was very much afraid of the condemnation that might one day follow from his side. But Carl behaved in a friendly way and was completely unselfish. This helped to restore the girl's confidence in her own safety. She relaxed a little and slowly began to trust her new acquaintance. On top of everything else, Nika was also well aware that no matter how proud she might be, she still needed the help of someone else. What Carl did for her was tantamount to a real miracle in a girl's eyes. Nika appreciated that very much. In the end, Carl had even managed to get her to move out of bed and into the stroller again. and to start exploring the house a little bit by moving around the different rooms. A fresh blush returned to her face, and her eyes filled with an inner light that Carl knew for a fact meant that the girl's emotional and physical health was clearly improving. Nika herself did not sit idly by either. She tried to give herself a massage, started practicing with a stiff brush, and even tried to do some simple exercises to strengthen the muscles of the spine. The woman really felt as if she was slowly returning to her usual life. And this couldn't help but please her wounded heart and her soul, which had already begun to hurt. This went on for some time. Carl came to visit Nika and helped her with household chores. And gradually, Nika herself returned to normal life, further and further away from the image of the gloomy, morbid recluse that her former spouse had created for her. All the while, Carl's fiancée, Alice, could never understand why her lover never once took her to see their future home together. Every time Carl did everything possible and made all sorts of excuses not to take the curious girl with him, then his car suddenly malfunctioned, or just no time to get ready and go somewhere, and all that sort of thing. Finally, Alice's patience failed. "Carl, excuse me, of course, for a possible suspicion, but you're clearly hiding something from me." The manager's fiancée folded her arms across her chest and looked at her fiancé with obvious dissatisfaction. Carl's shoulders immediately tensed. It was not in his habit to deceive the woman he loved, but this case was nevertheless an exception. "Alice, darling, I think you are mistaken," trying to say as calmly as possible, guy voice. "I have nothing to hide from you, except that I sometimes smoke in the backyard of our office." Carl tried to hug her jokingly, but she just deftly twisted out of his arms. "Then why haven't I seen your mansion yet? Maybe you're just seeing someone else. Who have you decided to spend the rest of your life with in this family nest?" "Don't talk nonsense," the groom smiled back. "You know I only love you." Alice pretended to believe in the words of the young manager, though reluctantly. Well, well, if you really love hugging his bride." Carl, to his surprise, suddenly realized that about his feelings for Alice, he may no longer be sure. That evening, the young man returned to his parents' apartment and was unable to sleep for a very long time, pondering his own emotions and feelings, and how dramatically his life had changed over the past couple of months. The next day was a real challenge for Carl. After work, he arrived at Nikki's house as usual to help her prepare lunch for the day ahead and dinner for breakfast. The girl drank only coffee, peeling the naughty peels off the potatoes. He suddenly heard a surprised voice behind him. "Carl! Are we expecting anyone else today?" "No, of course not. Why would you think that?" Without turning around, the manager answered. The woman made a sign to direct his attention first to herself, and then pointed to the window. There was someone in a cab waiting at the gate. Carl looked out of the kitchen window. The yellow car had stopped neatly in front of the gate of his house. The manager's heart froze for a second, and then it began to pound. As he got closer, to his horror, he saw Alice in front of the gate. The girl decided not to wait for a better opportunity and to catch her fiancé, so to speak, on the spot. "Well, Carl, open the gate. Accept a dear guest." The girl imitated a dance. Alice was dressed in a modest gray jeans and a t-shirt over the shoulders of an unassuming jacket throw. She clearly wanted to go unnoticed. Perhaps she even followed her fiancé on purpose. "What are you doing here, Alice?" "Seriously?" asked Carl. This behavior of the girl the guy considered unacceptable. "Oh, you do not look happy to see me. So you're distracted with someone here after all, while I'm not around?" Pushed Carl. Alice, with loud, sarcastic shouts, commenting on what was happening, went straight into the house. Not shy, the manager's fiancée went into the kitchen, where the pleasant aroma of vegetables available on the stove could be heard. When she saw a young woman in a wheelchair, Alice was a little embarrassed at first. Nika wasn't confused and was the first to say hello to the girl. She immediately understood everything and wanted to avoid any possible misunderstanding. "Good day. My name is Nika." The former landlady started. "Whatever you may think now, your fiancé didn't do any of this. He's just helping me as an invalid, that's all." Carl's fiancée only had enough to mutter something inarticulate in response, after which she literally yanked her fiancé by the sleeve of his shirt into the street, where she gave him a grand scandal. Carl had never before experienced such shame. He felt as if the ground beneath him were crumbling. They dragged him away, following them. The young man stood and listened as she shouted angrily at him. "That's a load of crap. I turned my back for 1 second. How did you find a replacement for me already? You have a good life, Carl. At night you rest with me, and during the day with a colleague you cook miserable borscht." Dashingly she confused you, and still sits in her chair and politely bills himself. "Oh, I hate it." "Stop it immediately," shouted back Carl. He didn't expect to explode like that himself. Nika is not a colleague. She just can't get back on her feet yet. You can't imagine what she's been through, and what fate has put her through, can you? You haven't even learned to understand anything about life. At your age of 23, oh, that's it. Alice choked with indignation. "Well then, stay with yours, you idiot. Do you know how many boys on my farm are crying for me?" Finally, Alice waved her golden hair and, swaying her hips smoothly with dignity, walked back to the gate of the house, where a pre-arrived cab was waiting for her. Carl realized that this was a complete breakup, the absolute stupid end to the relationship he had worked so hard to build up all year long. There were plenty of guys around her who were probably just waiting for her boyfriend's vacant spot to become available. Still, it hurt Carl. During this year, he had really managed to become attached to the beautiful, a little capricious and a little naive, but still so dear to Alice. At some point, though, Carl began to doubt his feelings for her. In his mind, he knew. They had been dating long enough to become a full-fledged married couple. Oddly enough, breaking up with her only brought Carl and Nika closer together. After the scandal that happened in front of the woman, Carl could not recover from the parting with his fiancée for a few days. However, the situation changed, as it often does. One particularly rainy day, Carl was on his way home from work and saw a tiny puppy on the side of the road. The little one whimpered pitifully, looking around. Maybe he had gotten lost, or maybe his mother had been taken unluckily with him. The puppy sat at the very edge of the road, wet, as if he had been doused from a bucket of ice water. Its little black eyes looked for rescue from any passerby. But all passed by the animal, indifferently looking down at the little frozen dog. Pity the poor animal. He was going to freeze to death. He's going to catch a cold. Guy stopped the car and quickly picked up the puppy in his arms before diving back into the car. The baby was wet and cold. But Carl wasn't put off by that. Taking a small towel out of the glove compartment, the manager wiped the puppy's face and back. Then he wrapped him in the floor of his warm jacket. That's how they drove home as he bought the doggy in hot water and shampoo. It turned out that he had a very beautiful golden red color. The puppy started happily running around the room. Actually, that's not how it's done. But anyway, he had been asking for porridge for a long time, said the guy, looking at the playing dog. He decided to name the puppy Jerry. The puppy liked the name, so he immediately began to respond to it. The next few days, Carl looked after not only Nika, but also his newfound four-legged friend. Carl gave the puppy all the necessary vaccinations and got him used to the collar order so they could walk together. Every morning and evening, Jerry turned out to be an incredibly intelligent dog. Carl couldn't get enough of him. Later, when the dog finally got used to Carl's apartment, he brought the puppy to stay at his country house. The girl was incredibly happy when she saw the dog. "My God, he is so cute," Nika praised him, flirting with the puppy with the help of a branch. "Who's so smart around here?" "Who's the smartest?" "Jerry, of course, that's Jerry, my good one," asserted Carl. There was another little shared tradition of walking around the mini park in their backyard and playing with the affectionate little dog. Nika, of course, was in her chair, but that didn't stop her from throwing a ball or just cuddling him. The puppy was crazy about his new human acquaintance. Within a few months, Carl's mental wounds had more or less healed, and he was spending more and more time with Nika. From their conversations with her, he was surprised to realize they had quite a lot in common. They listened to the same kind of music, read the same kind of books, and both liked good old comedies. Carl was beginning to realize that Nika was not just a friend and unwilling ward, but something much more to him. In the middle of winter, Carl suddenly disappeared from his life for several long weeks. The girl had already begun to worry if something had happened. After all, the young man had stopped answering even her phone calls. In a moment of incoming despair, Nika thought that maybe Carl had also left her. But then Carl suddenly appeared on her doorstep with a big fluffy Christmas tree and a dazzling smile of joy on his always so kind face. "My God, where did you bring such a beauty?" Nika asked him rapturously. "That's where I got it. There is no more," in tone with her manager jokingly replied. "It should be time to start preparing for the new year." So I stopped on the way to the Christmas tree market. An hour later, the girl asked carefully where Carl had been so long and why he did not pick up the phone. When she called, the guy just smiled slyly. "I understand. We should hold on to such a gift until the holiday. But no, I can't wait." Carl jumped up and began partly cheerfully, partly nervously, to pace the living room with large steps. No one understood what was going on until he finally gave up. "Nick is ready for you to have surgery in Boston in January. Can you believe it? You're gonna walk again?" That's all the stunned girl could say. "Come on, Carl. It costs so much money. I haven't had that much for a long time. You know that. Money has nothing to do with it. The man brushed me off. I put you on the quota a long time ago. I was just waiting for a spot to become available. And here was the New Year's Eve miracle. But I couldn't believe what I was hearing. Of course, for her, it was a miracle in the truest sense of the word. In an outburst of gratitude, the girl grabbed Carl by the neck and lightly touched her lips to his cheek. For a moment, the young people froze in front of each other. Carl realized he wasn't ready to let this girl out of his arms. Not tonight, not ever in his life. Nika, too, felt a big warm wave slowly rise up inside her. It was Carl awakening to an emotion and feeling that had long been forgotten by the girl. A feeling of happiness suddenly flooded all over Nika. The only thing the girl did not know was that there was no quota. Carl himself had paid for the impending operation in full. By selling the car and taking a loan against this mansion in which they were going to celebrate their happiest New Year's Eve. This is something he had never experienced before. Not even with Alice, the love for the girl. It was as if chained the guy from the inside. From the soft-spoken, undecided kid that Carl had always been, even at almost 30 years old, he suddenly turned overnight into a responsible adult man, ready to take responsibility for his loved ones and for the actions he committed. The first time this was evident in his attitude toward the crippled Nike when he took responsibility for the girl's future fate. And the second time now, when he was sitting in the corridor of the Boston Medical Center, where his beloved was undergoing the most difficult surgery to restore the spine. In fact, Carl himself had put Nika under the knife of American surgeons, so to some extent her life also depended on his decision. However, this was the only chance that could allow his beloved to feel ground beneath her feet again. And for that chance, Carl was willing to sacrifice everything he had. A few hours later, when Nika regained consciousness in her hospital room, the first person she saw was Carl, sitting on the edge of her bed. "Hi, Sleeping Beauty," Carl joked affectionately. "Hello, my prince." In tone with him, she also affectionately replied. The doctors told the child and Nikki that the operation was a success. So now the girl would have to undergo several months of rehabilitation, after which she would be able to continue her recovery at home. Nika could feel her legs again. Lizzie could feel her legs again. This feeling could not be compared to anything else. The young woman had covered within herself to go through all the difficulties and pain of physical therapy, just to start walking on her own again. Perseverance and patience bore some much anticipated fruit for her. She returned home, though on crutches, with the full awareness of her own victory over her disease. Back at her mansion, Nick and Carl began to live together. Day by day, they rebuilt their lives. Like the very nest that once dreamed of a modest senior manager, and now the deputy director of development in the company where he worked for a long 8 years. The young people's life together was filled with love, tenderness, and mutual respect. Even in her wildest dreams, Nika could not have imagined that this could happen. Kyle literally carried her in his arms, and the happy bride of such a display of care did not get the slightest bit tired. A year after they began to know each other, the couple Carl and Nika finally planned a modest wedding. The young people decided to wait for the moment when Nika could finally stand on her feet and be able to do without crutches. As soon as that happy day came, the couple immediately applied to the registry office. All this time, while the relationship was developing, nothing was heard of Bernard in their town. It was as if he had disappeared, dissolved into the station fog. After all, everyone here already knew him by sight, and no one wanted anything to do with him, let alone lend him money. According to rumors, the man left for another city, where he would have more booty money and fewer old acquaintances. To that end, Bernard completely destroyed all of his old SIM cards and bought a new, most basic phone so that he could not be tracked down by his old criminal contacts. Immediately after their wedding, Nika and Kyle went on their honeymoon to a beautiful seaside town, where the girls' parents used to vacation. Walking along the promenade, they were surprised to see a man sitting in the shade of a large beach umbrella from the heat. An old acquaintance of theirs who was also Nikki's ex-husband Bernard. Nika was frantically shaking Carl's hand. The young woman hoped that the man who brought so much evil would not notice her in the motley crowd of tourists. But it wasn't to be. Slowly lifting it up, they stopped the sight. Bernard instantly recognized both Carl and his ex-wife. "Calm down," her husband whispered in Nick's ear, grabbed the sleeve of his summer jacket. He wouldn't do anything else. Nika only clapped frantically. Bernard looked at her and smiled slightly. There was no trace of the man's former glossy charm. The crumpled, stale clothes and focused gaze very clearly said that Bernard spent most of his time in cheap beer houses and, as usual, he had no money. Though he tried to restrain his emotions, he, unlike Carl, ready right there to beat the scoundrel for everything he had done, did it badly. The man was clearly surprised by the couple. His look was one of frank envy. Still, Bernard found the strength to rise slowly, not with a firm gait. He approached the young men. "Oh, you are my friend. What are you doing here? I take it my ex is with you. She's on her feet like that. You must be early. I thought I sold it with you. Don't you dare go near her." Carl stopped him. His voice was sharper than steel, and his hand resting on the scoundrel's chest outlined very clearly the prospect of his meeting with the pavement. Bernard only fluttered her arms. "What are you? That you really do not need. It's all over now." He looked the sail from head to toe, and then poked his tongue and, having the nerve to turn to his former buddy, borrow a couple of $1,000. "Well, yes, my bad. I didn't have time. But you did get my house right." You think Carl's face flashed a look of utter contempt. Then he looked at his wife and smiled. Our house is in good condition, thank God, he calmly answered Bernard. About the money, no problem. Wait a minute. He heard that he was about to be given money in a jiffy, as he had always been before, and the twins' listening lips. The man involuntarily licked his hair with one hand. Not looking at it all, felt that a little more, and she was going to vomit. God, how could I live with this man? She asked herself. Finally, Carl pulled out a $5 bill from his wallet and defiantly placed it in Bernard's hand. That's enough for a bottle for sure, the man said sarcastically. I'm sorry. I don't deserve more than that, friend. The couple walked past Bernard in silence, leaving him clutching the tattered banknote in bewilderment.